Welcome to Conversations Live. For more than a decade, we've brought you the best in books, entertainment, and current events. When the movers and shakers of the world have something to say to you, they say it to us first. Now, here's your host, Cyrus Webb.
And welcome back, everyone, to Conversations Live. I'm your host, Cyrus Webb. Glad you all could join us once again, whether you're tuning in on the radio dial here in Mississippi at WYAD 94.1 FM. We welcome you all back to our show. Also, those joining us to our online audience around the world, including our iHeart audience. We're glad that you all could be with us as well. Our next guest is really one that I'm so excited to be able to speak with. She's the author of a book called At the Dark End of the Street, Black Women, Rape, and Resistance, A New History of the Civil Rights Movement from Rosa Parks to the Rise of Black Power. We're excited to welcome Danielle McGuire to our program to talk to us not only about the writing of the book, but also what it's been like for her to see the response over the years. Now, I found out about Danielle's book just this year because of the speech that everyone was talking about from Mississippi's own Oprah Winfrey, where she mentioned Reese Taylor. That led me to Amazon, that then led me to Danielle's book, and I had a chance to order the Kindle edition because already the print edition was sold out at the time. So this book is one that I think everyone will be able to really appreciate, including the expanded role of Rosa Parks that a lot of us don't know. If you're just not hearing about the book, we'll remind you at the end of our segment how you can get your own copy. But Danielle, hello to you and welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Well, glad to do it. And first of all, I want to say thank you for writing this book because I think there are so many people who would agree with me that a lot of what you chronicle in the book At the Dark End of the Street is things that none of us knew before. I know I had never heard it before, never read it before, didn't know the history. What has that been like for you to have written this book, Danielle, and to see the way that people are learning so much about people who they thought they knew?
Well, it's exciting because I was excited to write it and to sort of put these pieces together because I was always taught a version of the civil rights movement. And then when I really dug in and tried to look at it with a different lens, a different eye, it was so much more exciting and accessible. And I think gave us all kinds of new heroes and heroines.
Right, exactly. And there's, especially when it comes to, even as the subtitle of the book mentions Rosa Parks, I mean, a lot of people, I know, including myself, growing up in Mississippi, we're taught about Rosa Parks, but, kind of our understanding of Rosa Parks and her quote-unquote beginning in civil rights that we get to learn is what happened on the bus. And I think what you're allowing us to see is her expanded role when it came to civil rights, including being considered even in the book, as you chronicle it, the best field secretary that was out there. What was it like for you to learn not only, of course, the things that she was able to do during the 1930s and 1940s, but then to be able to share that with the world?
Well, it's great because I get so tired of people thinking that Rosa Parks was a tired old lady with tired feet who tiptoed into history. She was a fierce activist, a militant race woman who was actively involved in the Black freedom struggle in Alabama for years and years before the Montgomery bus boycott. Her grandfather was a Garveyite, who adhered to the ideas of Black nationalism. And so she grew up in a house that was filled with Black pride and resistance to white supremacy. In the 1930s, she was part of an underground movement in Alabama to protect the young boys known as the Scottsboro Boys from false charges of rape. And she joined the NAACP in 1943 after she had tried to register to vote 3 times and had failed. She just was not happy with the system. She wanted to undermine white supremacy, and she worked to do that in a quiet way, but in a very, very active way.
Right. I think that is so true. And again, thanks again to Oprah and mentioning in that speech about Reese Taylor, Danielle, because again, as I mentioned to you before we went on here, I had never heard that name before, and it's kind of embarrassing to say. I mean, when she mentioned Reese Taylor, I was like, who is that? I had no idea. But then to be able to read your book and to see, I mean, the courage that even she had after she had been assaulted, and then of course, being able to work with Rosa Parks and being able to share that story, and then what happened from there. I think the role of women in this book is what really impressed me so much, because you do share what I believe, Danielle, is the untold story of what was happening to a lot of women that we kind of, have heard about, we believed, but you kind of really give it a face. Has that been one of the exciting things for you now, especially in 2018, to be able to have those conversations about how even in that time there were women standing up against assault and against what was happening to women?
Yeah, we tend to be presentist in our everyday lives. We think everything's happening for the first time, but What we ought to know is that African American women have been at the center of resistance movements against sexual violence for a very, very long time in the United States, mainly because sexual assault was endemic in slavery, which was, systematically used throughout the United States, even in the North. And so Black women were some of the first people to publicly speak out against sexual violence as a tool of oppression. And they did this during slavery and during abolition. And then they continued to do it throughout the 19th century as a critique of the other kinds of racial terrorism that was being used, like lynching. The flip side of lynching was the rape of Black women. And so Black club women often spoke out about that. And then you see the ways in which women in the civil rights movement, one of the most important things that people want to be able to do in their lives is move through the world without being assaulted. And in the Jim Crow South, that wasn't a reality. And in fact, the system was set up so that you could assault people with impunity. And so Black women, again, spoke out in the 1930s and the 1940s. And their testimonies, I think, helped spark civil rights campaigns that we tend to think about as only rooted in, access to a seat at the lunch counter or a seat on the bus or the vote. And I think it is a little deeper than that.
For sure. I think that's definitely one of the things that your book shows. For those who are just tuning in, either on the radio side or online, you're listening to Conversations Live. Danielle McGuire is our guest for this segment. We're joining Danielle today to talk about her book, At the Dark End of the Street, Black Women, Rape, and Resistance, a new history of the civil rights movement from Rosa Parks to the rise of Black power. I mentioned, as a lot of people probably did, Danielle, of course, going to Amazon after hearing that speech, after hearing the name of Recy Taylor and trying to find something about her. I mean, the excitement about that book, it's so interesting to me what happened because, as I said, when I went right after that Monday following, you couldn't get it on Amazon. The print edition was gone. You could only order the Kindle, which I did. Talk to us about that, especially now the revival of this message of the book and the interest in the book. What has that been like for you to be a part of this, to be able to see people wanting to know more, but also to better appreciate, as you were saying earlier, that what we're seeing today is really nothing new?
It's really great. It's exciting. It's important. I think in some ways the book was published before its time, because it was published in 2010 originally. And so I'm so glad that the book has an afterlife and can be in this moment, in this reckoning, in this conversation. And it's really important because so often, it's white women who get the attention, A-list actresses, Olympic gymnasts, and it's really important that we focus on the women who remain the most marginalized and the most vulnerable to these kinds of assaults, and often the women whose stories are more invisible. And that's why I think it was so important that Oprah Winfrey, talked about Recy Taylor, because it's women like Recy Taylor, working class, women of color, women who are not often believed, who are oppressed by multiple intersecting, identities in our culture in that way. And so I really think it's important for those voices to come out into the public, and I'm happy to be able to help facilitate that in any way I can.
Right. Well, you definitely are playing a large role in that for people like myself, Danielle, who, again, we're in ignorance, quite frankly, about these individuals. And, again, even of Rosa Parks, who we think we know so much about. It was just like, wow, I had no idea. I had no idea that she was so active and so engaged. So that leads us to the why. Why was this a book initially you felt like needed to be written?
Well, I didn't start out with the premise that I would write a book. I started with a story, just one story of a woman in Tallahassee, Florida in 1959 who was a college student at Florida A&M who was kidnapped and raped by a group of white men. And she spoke out, and her testimony against the men brought them a life sentence. And it was the first time in American history that a group of white men received a life sentence for raping a Black woman. And it was groundbreaking, but it was also really different from what Black men were getting at the time. Rape was a capital crime throughout the South, and Black men could be sentenced to die for looking at a white woman the wrong way. So I started with that story, and I wondered, if Betty Jean Owens spoke out in Tallahassee in 1959, were there other women like her? Was she the first? She couldn't have been the first. And I started looking deeper, and really I found a lot of stories in the Black press, newspapers like the Chicago Defender, the Baltimore Afro-American, the Amsterdam News, where Black women, had been assaulted and then spoke out about it. And then I'd trace that story back to the county or the town where the woman lived, look for her, look for family members, and look for archival documents. And, I followed lots of stories like that. And what I realized was that these crimes against Black women were typical. They were, Betty Jean Owens was not outside of the norm, that what she was doing, what she was talking about, what she was willing to testify about, something that Black women had to endure since slavery, and that there was largely impunity for the white men who committed these crimes. But women like Betty Jean Owens in 1959, and like Reese Taylor in 1944, and like all of the women that I write about, they all helped to create a space to say, me too, and to have their voice matter and to lead to some convictions, which was a profound change from history. And so, pulling all those threads, finding all those stories, you start to see a wider picture emerge of the civil rights movement as in part organized and motivated by Black women's resistance to assault and demands for bodily integrity.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely an important story, and so glad that we had a chance to discuss it here, Danielle, and only scratching the surface. There's so many great details in this book that I think will help us to really look at not only the sacrifices, but also the contribution that Black women have made over the years, but also, how important it has been for so many people to fight for what they believe in. And I think that is the thing. And I think, we talk about today even about people using their voice. I mean, how much more dangerous it was even then, but even in spite of the danger, people like Reese Taylor, who was threatened, people like Rosa Parks, who knew the danger, they were still willing to do it. So it sets a great example for us. Again, Danielle McGuire has been our guest. The book is available now. It's At the Dark End of the Street. You can get it either in print or in Kindle the way that I did. Black Women, Rape, and Resistance, A New History of the Civil Rights Movement from Rosa Parks to the Rise of Black Power. And Danielle, how can our audience stay connected with you?
I have a blog, daniellemcguire.com, and I'm on Twitter at dmcguire13.
All right. Well, Danielle, thank you so much again. Really appreciate the time, and looking forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you. And we thank your audience for tuning in to another great segment of Conversations Live. If you all came in late and missed part of the conversation with Danielle, thanks to our online friends, you all can catch the replay right after we go off the air. The link is already available through our social media site, so head over to facebook.com/Cyrus Webb or go to twitter.com/Cyrus Webb. If you click on the link there, you can listen to the show completely for free and share with your friends from there too. Until next time, I'm your host, Cyrus Webb, saying as always, enjoy your day, enjoy your life, enjoy your world. Make sure you take out time to enjoy some good music as well as a great book. Thank you all for choosing Conversations Live today. You will make it a great one.